So, what advice would you give anyone going into politics?
I get asked that question a lot, and I always say the same thing. Do lots of other things first. That's my advice. There are no qualifications for being a politician, which is a good thing. It used to be the case, I think, certainly when I was growing up, and probably one of the reasons it never entered my head to even think about politics, was that politicians on the telly when I was growing up all seemed to be very similar types of people. They tended to be lawyers, former lawyers. They tended to be middle-aged white males. I'm obviously, some very key exceptions. Certainly in my life, an inspiration was seeing people like Winnie Ewing, Margaret MacDonald break that mold. But I would say that my advice for anybody thinking about becoming a politician, it would be, particularly if you're sort of like university age, is maybe don't go into politics. Don't necessarily think that the route in is through working for a politician, because the tendency there being, there'll be some very successful politicians have gone that route, but I think politics now demands an awful lot more in terms of experience of you. And I think it's a good idea to think, well, maybe one day I might want to be a politician, but I'm going to go and do some other things first so that I've got a breadth of experience of life before I decide. Another thing that I'd say that's worked out quite well for me is I'm actually quite glad that I didn't think of becoming a politician when I was, say, in my 20s, because I think it takes over your life so utterly, completely. I think about all the things that I might not have done if I had been in politics earlier. A lot of family things I might not have done, because knowing now, and I'm 51, and I became a politician when I was 46, I think, 46 or 47. I think, gosh, this is so completely and utterly, every aspect of my life is involved in campaigning and being away from home in the Parliament and all the rest of it. What would I have had to squeeze out of my life in order to have done this job effectively? So I'm quite glad from that personal perspective that I didn't become a politician earlier. But also, I ran my own company. I lectured for many years. I worked in a television production company. I worked offshore. I did so many other things in my life. And all those bits of experience that I have working in the public sector, the private sector, and also being a business owner have been really, really handy now that I am a politician. And I think that there's a lot of things about ordinary Scottish life that I think I can speak to with first-hand experience. So that's my main advice for future politicians: put it out of your head for a few years, do something else, and then come back to it if you truly believe you want to do it.
Yeah, what actually made you want to get into politics? What kind of sparked that interest?
Well, I've always been interested in politics. So I've always been interested in certainly the constitutional question around Scottish independence. I've been an independence supporter ever since I can actually formulate the words to evidence it. I mean, I come from a family. My father's been an SNP member. My mother and father has been an SNP member since before I was born, and I guess I've always grown up in that kind of like political household. My father was very involved in all the organisational backroom stuff with the party. So it's been part of my life, I suppose, that kind of involvement with the SNP tangentially. And it's always been the sort of household where we would talk about politics, and but I never felt the need to get involved myself in party politics formally. Like a lot of people get involved in party politics when they go to university. I didn't, although I felt very strongly about the political landscape of the time, and that would be in the 1980s in particular. So I've always been a very political person, but I'd never thought of becoming formally a candidate or anybody who wanted to get involved necessarily in elected politics. And even when I was, and I was always involved in like little micro campaigns around things that interested me, particularly around women's representation, particularly around things like issues that I didn't agree with. Didn't agree with, for example, the many estates Trump development there, was involved with against that, which obviously at the time the SNP were for. So a lot of that sort of stuff kind of stopped me. But also because I was interested in a career in the media, and I remember feeling that having an affiliation with a political party and being a party member maybe wasn't the best idea for someone who might end up getting into a kind of journalistic arena. I'm still not very keen on journalists being party members of any type. And I think that because I had that career, I thought, well, I know my politics, I know who I vote for, I know how I feel about things, but I'm not going to confuse the two things. I want to always have that kind of like general kind of distance. So I didn't really get involved in massive political activism until about 2013, 2014, when it's the Scottish independence referendum. And even then, I didn't campaign with the SNP, I campaigned with Women for Independence. And I was actually approached by the people that set up Women for Independence to head up the Northeast campaigning division of Women for Independence. And when that was over and the independence referendum was over, the people, so many people that I'd met in campaigning and sharing platforms with, were in elected politics in the Northeast, that they approached me and said, well, we think you should put yourself forward as an elected representative. There's a potential candidacy going in your area, the area you've lived in most of your life. Have a think about it. And of course, initially I was like, well, no, I'm not that. But then I thought, well, hang on a second. I've just spent the last 2 years sitting on platforms complaining there are not enough women in politics.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems a little bit hypocritical. So, I had a word with myself, because there's lots of people like that. You go, oh yeah, that's fine for you, but not for me. I'll just, I'll make those noises about that there not been female representation, but not me. And then I thought, no, very quickly thought, no, you have to walk the walk as well. So that's when I decided to put myself forward initially for Westminster for the general election, although I never really wanted it. I more or less did it for the experience, just to go through the process. And I was actually quite relieved when I didn't get selected. And because if I was going to go anywhere, I wanted to go to the Scottish Parliament, because that's where I believe that we should be doing everything anyway. So that's how I got involved in elected politics. So I suppose you could say I was kind of forced into it initially. I was not forced into, but certainly encouraged to go for it. Took a bit of time, a lot of chats with my family about what that would mean for us. But everyone was really supportive in my family. And of course, my father was absolutely delighted, because he'd been trying to sort of like get me more involved in the party for years and years and years. So yeah, so that's how it worked out. And very, very lucky to be in a position, unlike so many of my colleagues who went for election after election after election, of not been elected, coming second, third, that I was voted in the first time I tried. And the privilege of that is something that I'll never underestimate. A lot of people work very hard for decades, getting nowhere. And I'm very lucky to have been elected first time.